When your combat feels like it's taking forever, it's probably because somewhere along the way it turned into a slog. So after killing the scariest monster on the map, the players all just stand around hitting the bad guys until it's all over, and that part drags on forever. It's because your fights all have the same objective. And when that happens, you're destined to end up running slogfests. But if you shuffle in fights with different objectives, then you've introduced a second level of tension. Beneath the surface level appeal of hit points versus hit points, there is the tension of, yes, but will we actually succeed in our mission? So let me run you through a list of combat objectives, and you'll be able to chuck them on top of your next D&D encounter to guarantee it's a good time for everyone. And together, we will end the slog. Welcome to Mystic Arts, where I reinvent page 81 of the 2014 DMG and pretend like it's a brand new idea. My name is Daði, I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for 10 years. The party's forward progress through the story or the dungeon is halted by a random encounter. We roll initiative. If the random encounter is a small team of goblins, it's a skirmish. If it's a huge swarm of monsters, it's a horde of bad guys, and if the party was unaware, it's an ambush. Those combat types can all exist in that random encounter. Maybe the boss showed up in the middle of the dungeon, and now we're fighting a boss fight as a random encounter. That can happen, but all of those scenarios have the same objective. It's a deathmatch. The fight is over only once one side is dead. I love deathmatches, and I think you can run entire campaigns with nothing but deathmatches, especially if you mix up your combat types. They're never inappropriate. They're reliable and they're good fun, and for those same reasons, they're very popular and they're probably overused. I think I'd be a better DM if I ran more mixed objectives, because they lend themselves to the situation where the players go, oh, great, we've killed the enemy tank, now we just have to sit here for the next 30 minutes, slowly reducing the hit points of all the creatures on the field, so we can finally stop playing this endless combat encounter. Think about it like this. Whenever I'm watching a film and the fight scene starts and I find my eyes glazing over, it's usually because the fight scene, isn't about anything. The good guys will continue to punch the bad guys' lights out, and the bad guys will continue to stand up moments later and charge back at the heroes, and on it goes for as long as the movie thinks they can get away with it, and then at the end, the bad guy doesn't stand up. And we know that the fight can finally be over. So here's my question. How do you know the fight is over? You introduce new objectives. In video games, if you play loads of team shooters or hero shooters, there is almost always an objective. Killing bad guys helps with the objective, but doing the objective helps win the fight. Are you with me? The fight is over once you've won the fight. So you need to communicate what the objective is, and when it's achieved, the fight is won, and you can stop with endlessly whittling down hit points. No need to slog. The fight is over before all the bad guys are dead. Okay, you open the big double door at the end of the dungeon. Now you're in the final room. And the bad guys are in the process of ritually sacrificing the merchant's son to the screaming mass. Or completing the ritual that will sink the eastern seaboard and raise property prices east of the San Andreas fault line.
Yes, Superman, double jeopardy.
Where is it?
Anyway, you've got to stop the ritual. Really, this is the first kind of objective one thinks about. It's so simple, too. In 3 to 5 turns, the ritual completes and the worst case scenario happens. So it's a race against the clock. Only there's a few problems, aren't there? For one, you can't actually summon the Screaming Mass on your 3rd level PCs. The Screaming Mass is like a CR25 bad guy. I mean, you can do that and kill them all, but don't? So the consequences for failure can't be the BBEG shows up. But maybe the BBEG's best lieutenant can show up. It's still enough for the PCs to probably lose the fight, but not so bad that they can't at least try, or run away, or try to run away. Problem number 2 is that the players have to have a way to stop the ritual. If it automatically completes in 3 turns unless everyone is dead, your encounter is still a deathmatch, it's just wearing a silly mustache. The objective has to matter. Maybe discerning how the ritual works requires someone taking the study action and succeeding a religion or arcana check. That's up to you. Maybe the boss monster, the main cultist, is concentrating on a spell, and disrupting the concentration would end the ritual, or delay it by a few rounds. Maybe there's runes, vases, crystals, or other ritual materials scattered around the ritual chamber. Each piece has AC 10 and 10 hit points. Once all are destroyed, the ritual is halted. I've run a dozen variations of this kind of encounter, but the most recent one was against a necromancer summoning a bone claw. The ritual couldn't be stopped, but destroying the runes nerfed the hell out of the bone claw. As the DM, you can decide the consequences of failure and the prize of victory. Just be sure to communicate that to the PCs so they can make informed decisions. Remember that without informed choice, there's no gameplay. You don't need to make this overly difficult to solve either. The challenge comes from the fact that you're being attacked by the monsters while this is happening. You're an initiative too, so spending your action on halting the ritual feels right when it's all happening in 6 seconds. And you might think it'll feel bad to spend a whole action on stopping the ritual, but I find that a lot of the time, players who are anxious about not being particularly useful during their next turn are relieved to focus on a concrete and achievable objective instead. So, what if the BBG's lieutenant was summoned, and the ritual completes, and the screaming white draws his blade of starlight, and your players are desperate to get the hell out of there? Well, you need to make a daring escape. In order to create a daring escape, you must first designate a point where the players know they'll be safe. That way, the goal, the informed goal, becomes go there. You say you can see the way you came from is blocked by cultists charging into the ritual chamber. And you see the screaming white is summoning his legion of madness. And then you turn to the player with the highest passive perception and say, you can see there's a small crack in the wall. Just behind the white, it's a secret door. And through it, sunlight. When they open the secret door, the white and his legion flinch at the sunlight, but brave it to charge after you while they're not in direct sunlight. You make it obvious that the agents of the screaming mass won't follow you into the sun. So you keep everyone in initiative, and now they must charge through the legion into the secret tunnel that leads to the sunlight. And you make sure the message is clear. If you get to a sunlit place, you're safe and we're out of initiative. Now the question is, how do they get there? Do they use their actions to dash, disengage, attack to cover their flank? It becomes a game of how best to escape. And it doesn't require a skill challenge or a chase sequence. You can just use the combat rules to run this whole thing. Really, when you make the objective obvious, you make everything clear and easy. I find that a lot of creatives are afraid of being obvious or melodramatic. For them, everything is about subtext. And listen, you're allowed to just state the obvious. Let's say the players are in a pickle and they can't escape. You can just say, you see the reinforcements are coming. They'll be here in 5 turns. And now the PCs know they just have to hold the fort until then. Literally stay in this one place until the reinforcements arrive. Maybe they see the reinforcements coming. Maybe they know they're coming. Maybe a member of the reinforcements has sending and lets the heroes know beforehand, telepathically. And now the players have a simple goal. Just hold the fort. Be the king of the hill. They'll spend their turns healing each other, taking dodge action, tanking hits from the enemy's suppressive fire or artillery, occasionally slinging out attacks. This can be full of surprises too, as the enemy teams bust out all kinds of tricks to try and get the players off the point. Explosives, maybe? Really, Hold the Fort is all about hit points, the most important resource, but it can take on another flavor. What if you have to survive the waves of bad guys for as long as possible? Each turn, or every couple of turns, you add a new wave of enemies onto the field. Ideally, you make sure each wave sort of fits into one of the combat types, but at a few challenge ratings lower than normal, because eventually they're fighting the remnants of one wave, and in the middle of another wave, and at the end of a third wave. And then you've got a very different sort of fight on your hands. In video games, this game mode usually ends with everyone dying. And maybe that's the kind of game mode you're running, explicitly a last stand. If everyone's on board with that idea, it might be a lot of fun. But otherwise, you're going to want to provide some sort of release lever, either an extraction, an escape opportunity, or reinforcements. Which one you go for is up to you. This one can be especially fun for players if the waves consists of baddies that aren't tough on their own. So the players get to mow down minions and mooks, and you get to have the fun of outnumbering the players. Let's say it was an extraction then. It might work well with another combat objective. Save the NPC. You find some excuse to put an NPC at risk, and then the encounter doesn't even need to challenge the players. It just needs to threaten the life of an NPC. Or hell, it could just threaten the life of a specific player. like the elaborate scheme from our video on ambushes. The baddies are just after a specific target, so they steal them at camp in the night, or attack them in the streets, and the PCs leap to the rescue. During the entire fight, the party's main concern is, what if the bad guy doesn't attack me and attacks the NPC instead? Maybe the players hear about the NPC in danger, and they make a special mission just to get there and save the character. Or, if the NPC is a tough customer, someone otherwise high level, they could make an encounter be so incredibly tough that the best course of action is to steal the NPC and then get the hell out of there. That can be a lot of fun, especially since that way you can introduce the main bad guy early enough that the players can't reasonably fight them, but they're still in the initiative together, because the really tough main bad guy has the NPC hostage. This creates asymmetry and draws your players in by introducing the scary bad guy earlier, and makes them an active participant in the campaign. The objective works best when you really are okay with the NPC dying. If you make the game about whether or not someone lives, you have to be okay with the outcomes. This way, you put the NPC's life into the player's hands, and then you get the joy of not knowing what happens next, and you and your players get to find out together at the table. Another way you can introduce the monster early is by a player-driven mission. Maybe they learn about a way to infiltrate the enemy base and sabotage them somehow. Let's imagine the BBEG, the recently summoned Screaming White, has a fortress in the wilderness. The players know they'll have to go there one day, and they'd rather not have to deal with the entire fortress in one combat encounter, so they want to take out the watchtower. You can then run an encounter where if they fail, they might have to contend with the entire fortress. But if they succeed, the enemy loses their watchtower, and the next encounter becomes much easier. These are best when the players create their own creative solutions, and all you have to do is be ready to package their insane ideas as combat encounters. Really, that's a lot of the DM's job. Players come up with something, and you figure out how to make it a game. The combat system is a resolution mechanic, so if you're unsure of the outcome, have a big combat to see if they get away with it or not. What if, instead of sneaking in, they wanted to go through the front door with a bomb? Or maybe they had a huge battering ram they chanted to? The bad guys wouldn't like that very much, so they might try to stop the heroes while they escort the thing to where it needs to go. In video games, this is called the payload. The idea being that you have something precious, but big and obvious, and you need to escort it to a place guarded by the bad guys. In RPGs, it could be an NPC too. Maybe the players befriended a powerful giant, or a sexy gold dragon, and you don't want that to mean the NPC does all the work and nothing interesting happens. So you try and package it into an encounter. So you decide to have the dragon say that he can take care of this problem if they can provide him with a cover on the way in. Concerned about an approach to the fortress from the air, the gold dragon suggests that he adopts his sexy human form, and they march at the gates. Once inside, he'll sexily transform and breathe sexy fire on the exposed artillery. AB, what did I tell you about editing the scripts? You're supposed to let me know. Anyways, now you've got an encounter. The enemy targets the payload, the dragon, while the players protect it, taking out the sentries, the watchtowers, or whatever else, until they're in position to deploy the payload. There's a clear end to the encounter. The payload is where it needs to be in order to be maximally effective, which I suppose implies there's a half success too. The payload is almost at the optimal spot, but not quite, so it could be partially effective. What if instead of attacking the enemy's base, the player's own base was attacked, and now they're playing base defense? You create a tangible threat and strike at the root of their operation. A threat might not be enough to kill the players, but it's enough to destroy their bastion, set fire to their favorite tavern, or destroy their defensive artillery, or steal their magic items. Losing would be a huge blow, but only to the player's defenses. The enemy has no intention of fighting to the death. They're here to pillage and leave. And if the players don't stop them from leaving, they will strike again. This can be great fun. I most recently did this by setting a tavern of innocent people on fire, and the players rushed to put out the flames, forming lines with buckets to pour on the spreading fire. I've also had enemy soldiers sneak explosives onto the player's main ship to destroy all their artillery pieces. If the enemy has good intel, they might be able to do all kinds of targeted damage with their own targeted strike. And our 10th one, what if the players had good intel and they wanted to steal something from someone way more powerful than them? The old Yoink and Skedaddle.
And you're Skedaddle.
Break in, take the goods, and be out of there before anyone notices. Well, remember what we said about combat being an excellent resolution mechanic? You could decide that a small group of guards spot them. No super challenging stat blocks because the encounter is actually about whether or not the players can kill the guards before they raise the alarm. Or as a middle stage, maybe the guards raise the alarm a little and a few more guards show up. This way, it's down to the combat whether or not this objective succeeds, or if the players have to transition into a daring escape. All right, since we're going, let's add a couple more. What if there's two sides in the fight already at each other's throats, and if they kill one another, there will be a huge war. Hundreds or even thousands dead. This one we'll call the Peacemakers. Your players will be incentivized to subdue, restrict, grapple, disarm, use influence actions, and overall try to de-escalate the situation while everyone else is going at each other's throats. If they fight, it's war. So can the players get everyone to just chill?
Daði, chill.
Or as a variant on this encounter, could you decide that one of the sides is far stronger than the other, but the weaker side is backed by a more powerful faction somewhere out in the world? So the players must avoid the massacre because it's obvious who would win the fight, and maybe even more obvious who would win the ensuing war. Let's do one more variant on this. The arrest. When the players want to talk to someone who's been openly hostile, can they get them without killing them? This one's a little tricky if you're playing 5e because they have a way of handling non-lethal damage that makes it so that you can just decide that your natural 20 that did 50 damage was actually an attack to subdue. I've got a little homebrew rule on that. Attacks that would have massive damage killed the creature cannot be non-lethal. That's often enough to introduce a little wrinkle. On top of that, you could build in a ticking clock that'll make the player want to avoid having to use healing to bring those creatures back up to 1 hit point. So they're trying to grapple instead of knock out. Another way to spice things up is by promising a reward. A magic item is standard fare, but you might be tempted to have some sort of more nebulous or intangible reward, like a boon, charm. Maybe one-time use, maybe repeatable, I don't know, that's up to you. And if you're thinking it's a shame 5e doesn't have too many of those systems, then you're in good company, because Lone Colossus Games is launching a backer kit crowdfunding campaign to solve that exact problem. The Tome of Intangible Treasures 2 is the sponsor of today's video. It includes a ritual system to allow players to absorb the abilities of fallen enemies, 100 new monsters complete with stat blocks, art, lore, adventure hooks, and tactics, and there's 300 new boons and charms that can be enchanted using materials harvested from slain creatures. It's really cool, and the art and layout looks fantastic too, and they've got a spectacular track record. Their first 2 5e publications received a 4.9 and 5 stars on DriveThruRPG. If you back the campaign before April 4th, you get an exclusive D20 as the early bird reward. Click the link in the description to check them out. One thing that's great about objectives is the fact that we're introducing a whole second layer to the fight. It opens up design space. Winning both the objective and the fight will make your players feel incredibly proud of themselves. But there are other possibilities. You might win the fight, but lose the objective. Or win the objective and lose the fight. This way, there is tension throughout the encounter. As the party handily dispatches the bad guys, you can raise tension on the objective, or if they're really handling the objective, you raise tensions on the fight. This way, you can design encounters that keep the players on their toes, always guessing and second-guessing their decisions. Do I kill this goblin, or focus on the objective? When that starts to happen, the slog is gone. I've made a video about what I call the 8 types of combat in D&D. You may want to watch that if you haven't already, because this is kind of a partner video to it. Loads of folks in the comment section of that video asked about how objectives factor into the many types of combat. They assumed it was the 8th type, the puzzle actually, but I don't think that's quite right. The puzzle actually is a type of combat where the fighting elements are literally impossible to solve unless you solve the puzzle. But an objective is different. Any combat type can have any combat objective. You just marry them. Let me explain. If you're struggling with your next session, here's what you can do. 2 tables, a D8 and a D12. Roll on table 1 for combat types. Oh, a 5. The elite team. We're fighting an elite team, but why? Roll a D12 for combat objective. A 10. The Yoink and Skedaddle. Well, we'll want to steal something from them. Then you ask yourself, what does the elite team have that we want to steal? It's up to you. Magic sword, a scroll of Titan summoning, the crown of the true king of England. You have a quest giver NPC, tell your players about it, and then tell them that the elite team might be a lot more powerful than they are. They won't win a straight-on fight. Best to Yoink and Skedaddle. But let's be honest, a lot of the time your players will pick their own objectives and their own targets, and then you run the game accordingly. In those cases though, I find it's good to have a structure like this one to remind myself about the purpose of each encounter, to understand what they're about, what the story is, to avoid the slog. Obviously, I'm not saying every fight needs to have complex objectives, or that you're not allowed to just run death matches. They can be a lot of fun. I love running death matches, and I do them all the time. In fact, I probably run more death matches than all the other kinds of objectives put together. But an occasional combat encounter with an objective can elevate the whole story and your play experience. It'll make combat as a pillar of the game more engaging across the board. I work in the video games industry where I routinely watch teams of people try to make sure combat doesn't become repetitive. And the answer is almost always more variety. The boss fight's a slog, reduce the hit points and add a second phase with more features. The default enemy type is boring, add a few more variants. A ranger variant, a caster variant, a shield variant. The game is button mashing all the time. Well, let's introduce more abilities and then make the encounters tough so that you'll use the fun abilities, because if you don't, you'll lose the fight. Now you have to stop button mashing and play around with variety. Experiencing new things feels exciting. So if you're watching this video and the combat objectives aren't appealing, or your game system comes with these kinds of objectives baked in, great. Your main takeaway from this video and other videos I've done about combat broadly should be more variety is more fun. Slog is a symptom of boredom. It's what we call that time where the players are unengaged, and now they've got the boring task of slowly killing the remaining bad guys without any tension and without any investment. So mix it up. Take the types of combat, mix them with the types of objectives, and then mix that with CR appropriate creatures, and then you've got an endless machine for spitting out fun fights. And then all you've got to do is come up with excuses for each fight to fit into your adventure. That way, you'll never be stuck on what happens next. Just run good old fun fights. That's what most of these rules are about anyway. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. Thanks so much for watching this video. This channel is run by me and my girlfriend, and if you want to support us directly, consider joining our Patreon, where this month, Adept tier members get the Warlord. Experience being the ultimate full martial support character. You'll make your teammates better by making tactical decisions in the heat of battle with your orders and your maneuvers. And if you're feeling especially generous, you might like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when we release new videos. Until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.